على رسوله النبي الأمين الحفيظ الحليم الكريم الرؤوف الرحيم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي صدق الله مولانا العظيم. Honorable President of Minhaj-ul-Quran, Australia, Zafar Khan, President Minhaj-ul-Quran, Queensland, Dr. Amir Tanveer, Vice President, Brother Shabbir Ali, Dr. Mohi-ud-Din Basha, Khaja Nasiruddin, Brother Sami-ur-Rahman, Brother Atiq Ahmed, Sister Dr. Sayyida Umama, Sister Iman, Sister Fariha Zafar, all the respectable executive members of Minhaj-ul-Quran International. First of all, I would like to congratulate you all for organizing a seminar on this very important topic, which I believe is the need of the time. And the importance of such topic increases while living in multicultural societies like Queensland. So I thank Allah Almighty for providing us all with this opportunity to come together and talk about something very important, which I believe is related to every single life, a living soul living in Queensland. I would also like to welcome every single person, brother and sister, sitting here tonight for becoming a part of this beautiful activity. And I pray to Allah Almighty that may Allah Almighty accept this deed of joining a session, an activity which can open many doors upon us for thinking about our life, for thinking about our own religion, Quran, traditions of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our past, present, and future. May Allah Almighty bless this occasion. Whatever we say and whatever we listen tonight, may Allah Almighty help us all to understand that and act upon it the way He and His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam desires from us. Dear audience, when we talk about interfaith harmony, it is an ideal which is achievable, but it requires extraordinary efforts and work at multiple levels. Among those levels, one of the major areas is understanding each other's religious texts and scriptures. By that I mean, when we talk about interfaith relations and we interact with interfaith community, so among so many other aspects and areas, one important area in which everyone has to look into to strengthen the interfaith relation is looking into each other's religious texts and scriptures. There are occasions when from various different religions, different texts, statements or verses, usually criticized by other religious communities and interpreted or misinterpreted in a manner that the whole process of interfaith relation and harmony goes in vain. Because the interpretation given to that specific verse or concept was wrong, that was understood in a wrong manner, and then that interpretation was associated to specific community, and when that community comes forward for the better interfaith relations and harmony. So the critics, they would always come up and bring those verses which were misinterpreted by some people at some point of time to tell others that these people, they don't believe in peace or harmony in real sense. So it is important that while looking or working towards interfaith relation and harmony, we all look into those religious texts as well to understand the real spirit of that religion. Then only we will be able to understand the true message of that religious book or religion at large. Dear audience, different religions and their religious books contain such passages and verses and texts which are interpreted and explained by religious scholars, preachers and missionaries according to the objective circumstances of their time. Often such statements and phrases are viewed out of context, on the basis of which we infer different meanings and viewpoints. Our general understanding and belief about all the religions in the world, if you are a member of interfaith movement, if you believe in interfaith harmony, if you believe in peace in the world, so generally your view or belief would be that all the religions are advocate for peace, harmony, reconciliation, service to humanity, and protection of human rights. So a person believing in interfaith harmony would always believe in the fact that every single religion in the world does not preach hatred or does not preach the taking away human beings' rights from others. So whatever is there that might be political in its nature, that might be of something else in its background and basis. So we all believe that religion principally does not preach hatred or taking away others' rights from them, right to live and right to express. When we talk about Islam, the way such verses from other religions, they have been criticized. Similarly, there are verses of Qur'an and some traditions of Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ which are being misinterpreted by two groups. One group belongs to Muslim community, the extremist group, the people who motivate people to join terroristic activities. So sometimes they misinterpret those verses so that they can use those verses and references in their favor. And then the other group, they belong to a non-Muslim groups. So they would do that sometimes to spread hatred and fear about specific community in the society. So they would misinterpret those verses in a manner so that people can run away from a specific society or a community. So today, as a topic for this seminar, I have chosen a couple of such verses from the Quran and concepts which are being wrongly interpreted by both of these groups. And later on, that has become a most common idea and concepts, and the critics are continuing to criticize Islam on the basis of wrong interpretation of those verses. So what we will do tonight is we'll try to understand the right interpretation of those Quranic verses which are being wrongly interpreted by two different groups. The extremist group as well as the group belonging to other beliefs and faiths. But before that, let us learn and talk about the principles of exegesis. When we want to interpret Quran, so it is not a very simple basic science. Anybody would stand up and start interpreting the verses of Quran, or anybody stand up and start interpreting the hadith or tradition of Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, this is not that simple. So we have to understand the principles of exegesis before someone stand up and interpret the verse of Quran. So there are altogether 5 basic principles of exegesis. Any interpreter or exegesis, he would believe in and learn about these 5 principles before interpreting any verse of Quran. When someone suddenly stand up and start speaking about the literal meanings of Quran, that this is see what Quran has said about Jewish community, or see what Quran has said about the Christian community, or see what Quran has said about the other polytheists and all the other community. So this doesn't work like that. So what are those principles? The first principle one should learn and know before interpreting the Quranic verses in the right manner. The first principle is rarities of the Quran. In Arabic, it is said, Gharibul-Quran, the rarities of the Quran. What does that mean? Understanding the words in the Quran that are difficult to comprehend is a significant aspect of studying the Quran. Such words are termed Gharibul-Quran, as I have mentioned. Numerous traditions emphasize the importance of understanding such Gharibul-Quran, contemplating its verses, reflecting on it, and specifically grasping the meaning of these rare and difficult words. To understand this whole idea in an easy way, the rarities of Quran means when we talk about Arabic language or the Arabic of Quran, it is not a simple language. Every single word can mean 12 different meanings. So when a person unaware of Gharibul Quran, unaware of such sciences, stand up and start interpreting the verse of Quran and taking one simple meaning without understanding the concept, without understanding the context, without understanding the history and background of that verse, and then from the linguistic point of view, understanding the multiple other meanings of the same word, one cannot arrive at the right meaning of that verse. But unfortunately today, we see people sitting on social media, opening a new YouTube channel, and simply by reading and reciting Quran with a simple translation, they consider themselves scholars so that they can speak on the subject without having the depth of the knowledge. And same, the Orientalists and other people belonging to other religions and faiths and not having enough understanding and grip on Arabic linguistics, they would not be able to arrive on the right message and meaning belonging to that verse. Because that is not their specialization. Unfortunately, nobody cares, and every single person becomes a doctor of Quranic sciences and start commenting and start interpreting the verses in their own way and manner according to what they have learned in limited amount. So this is the reality of Quran. One important principle: before start interpreting the Quran, one should know about all such words and their multiple meanings, so that one can arrive to the right meaning in a right manner. The second important principle of interpretation of Quran is understanding the reason and occasion of revelation. Why specific verse was revealed and when that specific verse was revealed. When you try and recite a verse of Quran and simply translate that verse into your own language without understanding the historical perspective of that verse, when that verse was revealed, why that verse was revealed, what was the situation of that time, one cannot arrive and understand the real message of that verse. It would become very easy for someone who is listening to get misleaded from the interpretation and translation of that specific verse once someone does not understand that why this verse was revealed and what was the situation and what was the context. The third principle of interpretation and exegesis is understanding the concept of abrogation. What is abrogation? Nasikh wal mansukh. When we look into Quran, there are verses of Quran which are nasikh and other verses of Quran which were mansukh. What does that mean? One of the difficult things in the science of exegesis is to know which are the abrogating verses, the verses which are nasikh, and which are abrogating verses, which are mansukh. So according to the early scholars, abrogation refers to the cancellation of certain rulings of verse through another verse of Quran. A significant portion of the verses considered abrogated by early scholars either falls under specification and restriction or involves the clarification and explanation of ambiguous and vague matters. There are people, they don't exactly understand that there were some specific verses which were revealed at a time for some specific objective, and later on some other verses were revealed which became nasikh and abrogated the other old verses again in the same Quran. What does that mean? That now they will be recited in Quran. They are part of Quran. One will receive enough ajr by reciting those Quran. But implication of that verse will be stopped and restricted. And the new verses which came after and abrogated the previous ones, now the law and ruling will be taken from the new verses of the Quran. So this is a very deep knowledge and science of Quran and interpretation of Quran, which usually people do not understand. That which verse was abrogated and which one was there who abrogated that verse. We simply read a recite a verse, translate it, and start applying it. So that's why we need the scholars to understand nasikh wal mansukh. What were the abrogations and abrogated, the difference and division between those verses. So this is another important science and principle of interpretation one should learn about and understand before speaking about interpretation and concepts of Quran with confidence. The fourth principle is awareness of religious studies. When interpreting Quran or any verse, it is not a simple matter that requires a lot of other sciences knowledge of other sciences before getting into the science of interpreting the verse of Quran. So, not having enough knowledge of other sciences, that involves history, that involves the knowledge of civilization, that involves the knowledge of the old customs of that time, that involves the traditions and culture of that time, that involves the behavior of that society in which those verses were revealed, that involved other rulings these verses were connected to, and so many other sciences. Scholars like Shaykhul Islam, Professor Dr. Qadri, and he has listed more than 100 sciences in his book that one should know before getting into interpreting the verse of Quran. But we are unaware of them. And then the fifth one is having enough knowledge of your past. All other religious books, what was revealed to Jewish community, what was revealed to Christian community, what was revealed to other communities and believers of other prophets sent by Allah Almighty. So one should have enough knowledge about these aspects too before getting into interpreting those areas. So what we have understood is that the science of interpreting is not that simple. We have to have a basic understanding of 5 major principles of interpretation before interpreting and understanding the verse of Quran. Same case applies on interpreting the hadith of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, coming towards some of the examples which I mentioned earlier, that I will be quoting some of the examples from Quran which are being misinterpreted and wrongly interpreted by one of the two groups, and later on that became the major reason of criticism on Islam and towards Islam. One major concept is the concept of jihad. This is the most wrongly understood concept and associated with Islam. A lot of literature has been produced by Minhaj-ul-Quran International, especially by Shaykhul Islam, Professor Dr. on this concept. The concept and perspective of jihad. And actually, that has spreaded, alhamdulillah, enough. Now people understand that jihad is not war, it is something else. But still there are corners and groups of society, they still associate the word jihad with the concept of killing others, with the concept of violence, with the concept of hatred, with the concept of terrorism. So the word jihad is usually considered as a war, as I have mentioned, by the people and the groups, whereas Islam promotes and motivates person, an individual, to do efforts in his or her life. That effort could be of any kind and category. That effort could be to improve your inner self. That effort could be to shun away the sinful life. That effort could be to earn halal living. That effort could be to get rid of your anger and aggression. That effort could be to improve your social behavior. That effort could be to making yourself punctual for 5-time prayers. That effort could be putting yourself in habit of having fasting once a year for the month of Ramadan. That effort could be from stopping yourself from lying, changing your habit. So all these efforts towards the positive objective, towards the ultimate right objective which has been assigned and described by Allah Almighty, either in Quran or through the tradition of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all these positive efforts are jihad. That could be someone standing and working hard in the society for human rights. That is jihad too. That does not mean someone is carrying a sword or a pistol in his or her hand. That could be a simple civil movement for women's rights, for children's rights, for the rights of elders, for even animal rights. So any effort in the society one could do which is positive, which is a commandment of Allah Almighty, which is a commandment of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All such type of efforts are jihad. But unfortunately, as I have mentioned, so many other concepts like jihad, they have been wrongly interpreted, and the people, they have associated war, killing, terrorism, violence, and they have given the title and tag, the word jihad, to all such activities. But unfortunately or fortunately, in Quran, the war has been called qital. And jihad has nothing to do with it. Jihad is completely something else. But media, social media, international community, or even the extremist groups living in the society, whenever they have to associate or talk about the Muslim community, they will simply use the word jihad, which has actually nothing to do with fight or war. So this is the concept which has been misinterpreted. Now coming to the second most important example, there are 9 verses of Surah at-Tawbah. 9 verses of Surah at-Tawbah which are called verses of sword by the critics of Islam. 9 verses. Usually whenever you get into interfaith dialogue with them, whenever you will start talking about interfaith harmony or peaceful message of Islam, and you would invite them to understand what Islam has been telling us and preaching us, they would always come up with these verses. They would say, how you can talk about peace, love, interfaith, tolerance and harmony when your Quran says that, when Quran says this. So all that content they bring into the argument, most of it belongs to these 9 verses of Quran, which are the first 9 verses of Surah at-Tawbah. Now I am going to give you the right interpretation of these verses, so that when you go out and walk out of this hall, and someone again talks about these verses of Quran, so you will know the right context and right meaning of these verses of Quran. That they does not preach or propagate violence, but it has some other meanings which we have not been able to understand so far. Let's look at the first example. The first verse of Quran, the first verse of Surah at-Tawbah, in which Allah Almighty says, acquittal from Allah and His Messenger to those polytheists with whom you had made a treaty. That's the first verse of Quran. The critics of Islam and Quran, they would bring this verse in arguments. That see, you talk about friendship, you talk about harmony, but your religion and Quran is saying an acquittal from Allah and His Messenger to those polytheists with whom you have made a treaty. So they try, and same verse is being used by extremist people calling themselves Muslims too. When they try to propagate hatred among the society, so they would bring this verse. See, Allah Almighty is saying that Allah Almighty is acquittal, announces an acquittal, and Allah's Messenger announces an acquittal from those who are polytheists and not believers. But we have wrongly interpreted this verse, Now look at those great imams and scholars of interpretation of Quran. What exactly they have understood from these verses. So only their interpretation would be the right interpretation to understand and believe in and interpret. Imam al-Wahidi explains the concept of the revelation of this verse so that we understand why this verse was revealed. The exegesis relates that when the combatant Arabs started breaching the treaties that they had concluded between themselves and Allah's messenger, Allah Almighty ordained His Prophet to declare the renunciation because of the breach of treaties by them. So this is completely a different subject, and this is not a lifelong or ultimate message that will continue. No, that is a very time-specific verse which was revealed in Quran on a one specific occasion. And one was that at the time of Sulh Hudaybiyah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when Rasulullah got into fact with Meccans, and it was decided that both communities will not harm each other anymore. And this will continue for the next 10 years. And no fight or war will be fought between Muslims and Meccans. And neither any war will be fought between the allies of Meccans and allies of Muslims. And no one would support their allies to fight the other who is part of such treaty called Sulh Hudaybiyah. But then the Meccans of that time, they breached that contract. In fact, it was signed between them and Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Muslims of that time, they were in confusion. And they were, because one party, they had gone out of that fact. And Muslims, they were standing still and waiting what we should do. We cannot breach the contract as Allah Almighty has educated us in Quran that one should stick to the commitments and vows which someone takes. So then, to make them understand, Allah Almighty revealed these verses which are called the verses of soul. That when they had gone out of the fact, there is no obligation on you. You, Muslim community, can dwell. And whenever now you find them in the battlefield and ground, do not hesitate in getting into the war, because it is the other party who has breached the contract and not you. So this was the whole concept and context of these verses. But unfortunately, the terroristic mindset, they would use these verses in their favor to motivate people to kill non-Muslims and innocent citizens of different countries. And this is being used by the non-Muslim society, the people not in love with Islam. They would use these verses. See, we were always saying Muslims are not a peaceful people. Muslims are not the peaceful citizens. See, their Quran is telling us to kill. Their Quran is talking about acquittal. No, we cannot look at these verses without a context. So the context that those verses were revealed specifically for a very specific time period on a very specific incident that has no implication for the rest of the Muslim community till the day of judgment. This is important to understand. Like Ibn Kathir and other exegetes also quoted the same context of this verse. So it is clear that this verse was revealed in reference to the specific historical context in which the renunciation was declared by Allah Almighty, because the Meccans had breached the peace treaty with the state of Medina. Same is the case of the second verse of Surah at-Tawbah, in which Allah Almighty states, "You may travel freely in the land for 4 months, and know that you cannot weaken Allah at all, and Allah will disgrace the disbelievers." Now the critics of Islam, they would suddenly come up, see what kind of message Quran is preaching. Quran is talking about whosoever does not believe in Islam, Allah Almighty will disgrace them. So how a Muslim can talk about interfaith relation and harmony? No. Again, this verse has revealed in context of that specific breach of treaty between Meccans and the state of Qadri. So whatever Allah Almighty has revealed in these verses that have strictly to do with that specific incident, and there has no other effects and impacts on the larger community and relationship between communities till the day of judgment. So it is our weakness that we interpret them and then out of fear we run away from the dialogue and arguments and cannot respond to those critics. So same Ibn Kathir relates again the concept from Ali bin Abi Talha. He says that Abdullah bin Abbas said above the verse, this is a declaration of acquittal from Allah and His Messenger ﷺ to those Meccan polytheists with whom you had made a treaty of peace and they breached it. On breaches of peace, you may still travel freely in the land for 4 months as a truce period. The Allah fixed a period of 4 months for those who had concluded the treaty with the Messenger of Allah to move about in the land wherever they want. So then similarly, that goes on, and Imam Muhammad bin Ishaq and then Shaykh Imam Mujahid and others maintain the same verse was with the idea. The same verse was revealed for the people of Makkah as the Messenger of Allah concluded a treaty with Quraysh in the year of Hudaybiyah, year 6 of Hijri, that they would not fight for 10 years, whereby live in peace and restrain their hands from one another. As a result, Banu Khuza allied with Allah's Messenger, while Banu Bakr sided with Quraysh. However, Banu Bakr attacked Banu Khuza with the support of Quraysh of Makkah and broke the treaty. That's when these verses were revealed that now Muslims have no obligation, you can fight them back. So these verses are related to that. There is another verse of Surah Tawbah, which is the 4th verse, in which Allah Almighty says, except for those polytheists with whom you made a treaty and who did not breach any of its terms with you, nor did they support anyone against you. So fulfill the treaty with them until the end of their term. Indeed, Allah loves those who guard themselves against the breach of covenant. So this verse itself is evident on the concept that this is not about a general killings of human beings or general killing of non-Muslims. Even this verse categorically providing us understanding that Allah Almighty said, you can fight back or kill only those who have gone out of the pact, and you still stick to your covenant and your pact with those tribes who have not become part of this breach. So you will fulfill your covenant, you will fulfill your vow, you will fulfill your pact with them. So if it was about a general game, if it was about a general fighting non-Muslims, so categorically a message would have been revealed that now you have no obligation, you fight every single Meccan and allies. No, Allah Almighty said, you can only fight back with those tribes who have actually broken and breached the pact, and you stick to your pact and statement and words with those allies of Makkah who have not become part of their breach. So this is a very clear message and evidence of the concept which I am trying to explain here, that this whole idea was about a one specific incident about which these verses of Quran were revealed. There is another verse of Surah Tawbah in which, this is the 5th verse of Surah Tawbah, in which Allah Almighty says, so when the forbidden months are over, kill the idolaters. Wherever you find them, this is a very popular verse, they would always bring in their favor against Muslims. When he says, wherever you find them, or capture them and imprison them, or lie in wait for them at every place of ambush. But if they repent, perform the prayer and give the prescribed alms, then leave their way open. So this is a very popular verse which usually the critics will bring in. See what Quran is saying, wherever you find them, you kill them. Again, I am bringing you all back to the same context. That has no universal meaning or implication at all. So this is exactly and completely related to a one specific story. When Muslims were in confusion, and Allah Almighty removed their confusion by telling them that you are not at fault. Because they breached the contract, so it is a completely a political warfare going on between Mecca and state of Medina. That has nothing to do with religion. And once that was over, no more implications for other communities living in Australia or other communities living in the United States or Europe. So there has no implications. So if someone tells you these verses and try to provide you interpretation which gives you a message that today while living in multicultural society, so have a hostile relationship with other religious communities or hostile relationship with other communities living in your neighborhood, that would be a wrong message and misunderstanding from those verses which Allah Almighty has revealed related to that specific issue. Your audience, there is another verse of Quran which is the 12th verse of Surat at-Tawbah, in which Allah Almighty states, if they break their pledge after having made their treaty and openly revealed your religion, then fight the leaders of Kufr. Now, the critics will bring this verse again against Islam. The Quran is saying that you go and fight the leaders of Kufr. Again, this verse is related to the same concept and incident when the Meccans went into war against the state of Medina. Purely political scenario, and that has no implications afterwards. And this has been described by great intellectual scholars and mufassirin of their time throughout the 1400 years. And no great scholar has taken any such message which today an extremist or terroristic mindset would like to interpret in a manner. What they said? By saying leaders of Kufr in Quran. So that does not mean you go and start killing the priests. That does not mean you go and fight the religious leaders of other communities. No, that has a very specific meaning which says and talks about the leaders of militants of Mecca who fought and killed the innocent allies of Medina. Only Muslims are made allowed here that you can fight them back. And you can find those leaders who allowed and became a part of mass killings of the allies of Medina. A political warfare is going on. And all these verses as a message are being revealed, again specifically related to one specific incident which took place 1400 years ago. Your audience? Now coming to another verse of Quran as an example. Again, the critics of Islam, they would use it. When you will sit with them for interfaith relation and harmony, they will bring this dialogue in. They will say, your Quran tells us that do not make friends with non-Muslims. Don't make friends with Jews. Don't make friends with Christians. So how you can talk about harmony and love and tolerance and peaceful coexistence and living? They will always bring this verse and interpretation in. So today we will understand the right context of this verse The verse is from Ali Imran, verse number 28, in which Allah Almighty states, the believers should not take disbelievers as guardians instead of believers. And whoever does that will get nothing from Allah unless you guard yourself against them with full consciousness. Allah warns you to be aware of Him, and to Allah is eventual return. So the critics would bring this verse in their favor against the Muslim community. Another verse from Surah Ma'idah, verse number 51, again on the same topic, Allah Almighty says, O believers, do not consider the Jews and Christians as guardians. They are guardians of each other. Any one of you who trusts them as an ally will become one of them. Indeed, Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So these two verses are usually quoted against the Muslim community as a criticism on the Quran and a criticism on the message of Islam. Now look at the real context of these verses, provided by companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala said, and a couple of other companions, they described that why these verses were revealed. They say there were people who were trying to seduce Muslims and Ansars of Medina and making them friends with the Jewish of Medina, Jewish community of Medina, and Meccans, and then gradually conspiring against Muslims and the state of Medina. And whenever they would interact with those enemies of the state of Medina, and someone questioned an object, they would say, we are just doing an interfaith thing, we are just doing a peace and harmony related activity. But in their heart, Allah Almighty knew that this is not just an interfaith relation related activity. They are actually conspiring against the state of Medina and breaking the Ansars of Medina from the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and making them close to the enemies of state of Medina. That was the time when Allah Almighty revealed these two verses. And again, these verses were time specific. It wasn't the universal applied verses which will be applied till the day of judgment for everyone. It was very time specific that the people who were camouflaged themselves and they were telling others we are doing the right thing, but in their heart they were hypocrites and they were conspiring against the state of Medina and breaking people from the company of Rasulullah. So Allah Almighty opened their secret by revealing the verse categorically and telling those people, no, do not take the Jewish community and Christians living at that time or Meccans as their allies. Stick to with yourself, stick to each other within the Muslim community to protect your state, for the betterment of your state, to protect your faith. So it was again the political scenario going on around. It wasn't about religion at that time. It was a political state of Medina, and then the political state of Mecca, and then other political entities who were trying to defeat a newly created state of Medina. And they were conspiring against the newly created state of Medina. So Allah Almighty revealed these verses with a very specific time-limited message that do not take allies from other communities, have faith and believe in each other, trust each other and do not trust others. They would have a mal intentions against the Muslim state. So this was the verse, and multiple mufassirin and interpreters of Quran, they had come up and explained this whole idea with this meaning. Dear audience, similarly, some other concepts, two more other important concepts. Another important concept we usually listen to and people talk about is the concept of Darul Harb, abode of war. You will hear many extremists and terroristic organizations, or people from ISIS, or people from Al-Qaeda, or Taliban, or a couple of other such entities. You will hear them talking about that this is wrong, migrating towards the non-Muslim country. And any non-Muslim country, they would simply declare them this is an abode of war. So everything related to destruction, everything related to killing others or violence, they would allow, because it is an abode of war, so Muslims can do anything. So this is completely a wrong interpretation or understanding of Quran, or understanding of message of Quran, or understanding of message of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Dear audience, so the opposite of Darul Harb is Darul Islam, Darul Salam. And they would simply say all the Muslim states are Darul Salam, abode of peace, and all the non-Muslim states, they are Darul Harb. And the concept they would bring in as an argument is that because the governments of those countries are non-Muslims or non-practicing, so because the country has a different faith, so that is abode of war. Whereas all the Muslim states and countries, because the governments are Muslims, whatever they do there, so they would simply declare that Muslim country abode of peace, which is Darul Salam. So interestingly, these interpretations comes out of ignorance, because these people have not studied Quran. These people have not studied the traditions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They know nothing about Islam. That's why they are interpreting and elaborating and propagating this kind of idea. If you talk about the great jurists like Imam Azam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu, so the best way is to get interpretation and meaning of Darul Harb and Darul Salam for Sayyidina Imam Azam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala. See what he says and what he has to say about Darul Salam. He said, when we call any country Darul Salam, that is not because of the government of that country is Muslim. That doesn't make any country Darul Salam, abode of peace. Or a majority people living in that country are Muslim. That does not make any country Darul Salam. According to Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, he says that any country, that may be Australia, that may be any European country, that may be Muslim or any non-Muslim country, wherever people have justice, people have right to education, people have right to health, people have right to expression, and people are free to practice their religion in that country is a abode of peace. That country would be called Darul Salam according to Islam. So if we today look at 55 Muslim countries of the world, to me not a single one is Darul Salam today. Whereas hundreds of non-Muslim countries like Australia, where people have access to justice, people have access to good health care, people have access to free education, people have access and people are allowed to practice their religion according to their own desire and way. People can create, people can construct the worship places, people can maintain their worship places, people can live their life the way they want. And whenever there is an injustice, they would get justice from the courts. And the government would play a role without any bias. So to me, according to Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, Australia is Darul Salam. According to Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, any such European or non-Muslim country is Darul Salam, abode of peace. And according to his definition, even if it is a Muslim country, known for Islam, majority living in that country are Muslim. Or even in that country, government is Muslim. if there is no justice for people, if there is no free health care for people, if there is no access to basic human rights in that country, even the followers and the living citizens of that country are in majority and they are Muslim, and government is Muslim, still according to Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, that country is not Darussalam. So this idea propagated by some nonsense people worldwide, that migrating towards a non-Muslim country is like migrating towards Darul Harb, and fighting against such place is allowed in Islam. This is a completely wrong interpretation, and one should be aware from such interpretation and keep him or herself away from such interpretations and ideas, because they are not Islamic. They are violent ideas, they are extremist ideas, and that has nothing to do with Islam. That has nothing to do with Qur'an. That has nothing to do with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's teachings. Dear audience, another concept which has wrongly interpreted, and some of the movements in UK, in Europe, and a couple of other countries, they call themselves even Khilafah movement. The whole idea they propagate is establishing a universal khilaf. And then they would tell everyone that establishing a khilafah is the most noble cause and idea given by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then they would quote a tradition of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to them, stated that one should act or work towards establishing a khilafah, and before doing that, someone died, he would die in ignorance. So they would bring this tradition, misinterpret it, and then propagate an idea of establishing a khilafah. Dear audience, the word khilafah in Quran and in the tradition of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is completely different. It is the whole idea. This word khilafah has come out from khalafa, and that means naib, person coming after someone, succession, generation after other, children after the parents. And this whole thing continues the idea, and even if we take this tradition of Rasulullah working on khilafah, someone dies before that, we would die the life of ignorance. So to me, the right interpretation of this tradition is that work hard on your children. This is your khilafah. Your offsprings, the next generation. Even if you are doing a job, if you are running a business, before you retire, before you get retired, before you leave this world, before you leave that position, prepare others to take your position. This is the concept of khilafah. It is no such idea of establishing a universal political government worldwide. Not a single verse of Quran, not a single tradition of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam scholars have ever witnessed which would support the idea of establishing a universal one Muslim government worldwide. This is a wrong interpretation and propagation of the concept worldwide. One should be aware of. But unfortunately, there are movements who are propagating this idea worldwide. Dear audience, so this was another concept. Last but not least, very important and interesting concept, especially very interesting for our sisters sitting here. So this would be the last example, considering the constraint of the time. So I would finish my talk on this example to give you an idea how Quranic concepts are misinterpreted by people. And then the critics, they become habitual to criticize Islam on the basis of wrong interpretations. There is a very popular verse of Quran from Surat An-Nisa, verse number 34, which is normally translated. The word used in this verse is وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And then the people infer message that Quran has allowed men to beat women, propagating domestic violence. And then they would create a percentage, okay, you can beat this much and this much not. So interestingly, Quran and the verse they would bring as an evidence that has nothing to do with beating someone. Wadribuhunna has no meaning of beating. This has been misinterpreted by even ulama, wrongly interpreted. And Islam has been associated with the concept that Quran allows the husband to beat women upon her mistakes. Not at all. Islam has not allowed husbands to beat women at all. That would promote domestic violence, which Islam has stopped and Islam has disliked throughout 14th century. Shaykhul Islam Professor Dr. Qadri has beautifully explained this whole idea and meanings of Wadribuhunna in his new translation of Quran called the Manifest Quran, which is available outside or on the stalls as well. If someone interested, you can take that along. So I will give you some details from his interpretation. So there is the word Wadribuhunna, which has been used in the verse. But as we have discussed earlier in the beginning of my talk, that the realities of Quran, that every single word would have dozens of meanings sometimes. So it is important to understand which meaning should be given to that word, understanding the concept and context. So the basic root word for Wadribuhunna is darab. So one meaning of darab is beating, striking. But that is not the only meaning. There are many other meanings of the word darab too. It also signifies the separation of one thing from another. It also indicates a shift from state of silence to state of sound or noise. It also indicates the heart's constant state of movement, that is also called darab. It denotes the separation of one part of body from other, that is also called darab. It also indicates trembling. So darab has the meaning of trembling in it too. Like in Quran, verse 20 of Surah Muzammil, it says, وَآخَرُونَ يَضْرِبُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Even here the word yadribu has been used. So while others will travel, where the interpreters would interpret that while others will travel in the land, and for the traveling, Allah Almighty has used the word yadribu. So when we look into this specific verse, so it is important to know the concept and context of this verse number 34. And when you will look at the context, the whole idea will be clear. Basically, in this verse, Allah Almighty is educating human beings and believers of Quran on dealing with matrimonial dispute. And if you look at this verse and a verse before, the idea which has been propagated by Quran here is giving a 3-step solution. That if there is a dispute or fight between husband and wife, so the first step again here in this context in Quran, which has been described by Quran, is that try to resolve your dispute by talking to each other. If that doesn't work, then the second stage would be separate your marital bed. Here, not a complete separation has been educated. Just separate your marital bed, but you live in the same house, you eat together, you talk about daily domestic affairs, but for understanding and solution purposes, separate the marital bed. So that is the second stage. And then at the third stage where yadribuhunna word has been used, then strike separation which means then travel away from her. It has not been prescribed or said that then you suddenly start beating her. Because this whole idea is to propagate and promote the reconciliation between husband and wife. And no sensible man would consider the idea that where you are trying to build up relationship and suddenly you start beating. So no logical mind would support this meaning here. So it means that when solution is not working, all two steps are not working. In the second stage, you were asked to separate a marital bed and not a complete separation. But on the third stage, if both solutions and both stages have not worked for you, then travel away from her. A clear separation in affairs, not the divorce, for the solution. And then at the same place in Quran, this has been described. At the fourth solution, then involves some arbitrator who could sit between you both and listen to both parties and resolve your matter. So when you look at the concept, as I have mentioned, while interpreting Quran, understanding the concept and context is very important. So here the context is to resolve a family domestic matrimonial issue and not to aggravate it. Beating each other would certainly aggravate the dispute and not resolve it. So that's why this word has mostly wrong interpreted by even scholars, which after a very, very long time Shaykhul Islam has brought up and gave a very beautiful right meaning to this word Qadri, which means that strike separation and not strike her. So this was the idea. And this gives us an idea how much important it is to have an understanding before interpreting this whole thing. And then when we will look at that translation, as I have mentioned as principle, you should know the traditions of the Prophet too. When Rasulullah himself clearly said that the best among you is the one who is best with their family. The best among you is the best who is best with their women. And I am the best among you because I am the best in behavior with my women. So when Rasulullah is educating Ummah on these lines, how it is possible Quran suddenly tells them to beat women? So this is a wrong interpretation of the word. And there is another verse by which I have been narrated by Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa in which she says, Allah's messenger never struck anything with his hand, neither a woman nor a son. So when the behavior preached by Rasulullah and his sunnah is peace, is loving, is caring, is respected, the women folk, how it is possible that Rasulullah didn't understood what is the meaning of Qadri. If Allah Almighty was allowing someone to beat and Rasulullah stopping people from beating, the right meaning would be the meaning which Rasulullah understood from these verses. So I would finish my talk on this example and now summarizing this whole idea and concept which we have been talking throughout the nights today is that when you would listen to the scholars or interpreters or maybe the Orientalists or the critics of Islam, or you sit for interfaith relation or interfaith dialogue with other community, it is obvious that the opponent would come up with such examples from your book. And the person would quote such verses against you. So it is very important for interfaith dialogue that you have a right understanding of these verses, the right understanding of these traditions of Rasulullah, so that you can convince the opponent, no, Islam is completely about peace. Islam is completely about love. Islam is completely about mutual respect. Islam is completely about peace and love, care, tolerance. and a peaceful society. May Allah Almighty help us understand whatever we have said and uttered so far. And may Allah Almighty help us so that we can act upon whatever we have said. And may Allah Almighty help the society to have a better and more understanding of our own book, Qur'an, and the tradition of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the end, before I conclude, this is a very common phenomena which is becoming very common nowadays. That whenever we find a difficult verse in our scripture, we run away from it. And we sometimes say, okay, you don't have to have a faith and believe in all the verses. That would certainly take you out of the ambit of Islam. It is not the book. Never question your book. Never think wrong or bad about your book, that maybe something wrong has been written there. No. This is the divine word of Allah Almighty. The problem could be with the interpreters. The problem could be with the interpretations. Maybe if you find 100 interpretations, they all could be wrong. Always look for the peaceful message, because the spirit of Islam is peace. The spirit of Islam is love. The spirit of Islam is respect. So look for the right message. There are thousands of interpreters and scholars. If you don't find one, look for others. Look for third, look for fourth. You will find one with the right interpretation, who has interpreted and given the peaceful message. Like Shaykhul Islam and Minhaj-ul-Quran International. Today, in this century, Minhaj-ul-Quran International, under the leadership of Shaykhul Islam, Professor Dr. Qadri, is doing this tremendous work of rightly propagating the right interpretation of these verses and removing all the misconceptions about Islam, about all those criticisms which are being made and thrown towards Islam, clarifying them and bringing the right message back to the society so that people can love this beautiful religion, so that people can love Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his beautiful character, so that people can learn from the traditions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his beautiful message. The people who have not explored much about the Holy Quran, I would also invite you all tonight to learn and know more about the words of Shaykhul Islam, Professor Dr. Muhammad, his literature, and many of his books are available outside of the stall. In the end, again I would like to congratulate all the brothers and sisters in Minhaj-ul-Quran International, Queensland, for organizing such a beautiful seminar and inviting you all and providing me with an opportunity so that I can meet you and speak with you on this very important topic. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum.